Primitive Jesus, satire. Ever reach relenting arcs, ever reach for new realities. My gun the fun, my gun the fun to blow the ceiling I touch off a world that is too adjunct to hills. Remote words, curdle in motley. However mind they be, said Dickinson, you see. So let stony orifices that pixelate the same resulting lilac. Stars blossom. Stony orifices might. Flesh combines with stone that way. Spit your flecking lights, O muse. I've imagined enough of your glens to be fecund again. Yes. But in different places, places, you revive this time. So, within a memory, within time, is a slate on which is written, in the scrutiny of stone, the meaning for that memory from softened dirt. Collect the worldly stuff into a thin thing about one's past, is that it is depthless, was only once robust and touchable in the thin, eating seconds between one moment and the millions of others, growing to seed thereof, afterwards, into forgetting or remembering. However, some moments, via whatever cognitive reasoning of the mind, are mysteriously etched forever into what is conscious forever. It is this distinguishing trait of memories that makes any human wish to apply depth to them in order to prove the straight practicality of the mind. After all, why do memories exist, if not to highlight a certain page in one's life? With the tendency to attach meaning can sometimes come the gestation of a fabricated meaning. With the tendency to attach meaning can sometimes gestation fabricated, which is why I load on this particular past incident the minutest grain of salt. However, by the pendulum of thoughts this and that way, I've come to pass over this memory many times. That is, if we can categorize these the same, like a ghost floating his visage over the inert position of his own corpse. So I was playing soccer one day in 4th grade, and my endorphins were buzzing around, and the air was light, and suddenly, viciously, something horribly uncontrollable came over me. I started thinking to myself, fuck God over and over again, in a hilariously demonic loop. The very taboo mindset behind the thought made it all the more irresistible, though I am sure I, for the most part, lacked control in this. I couldn't stop thinking it, no matter how hard I tried. So I went to hide under the forgiving shade of a tree, to soak in the vinegar of this inexplicable misery, and I let the thought clang against my head like a marble in a tin can, letting the single stupid thought, fuck God, transfer through my blood and bones, making me shake. Laugh, you brooding hominid, for all is of a piece. and the meter displays palsy at the frightening part. The dignity lain in that I weren't confineth, the chapped ancillary motion, a madrigal in terse, a different place for the muse, and was how I seemed to snatch this thought out of the prepubescent air. There was no reason behind it. So laugh. And I suppose there remains none for God, he broods, outside of reassurance. But then how could something upstairs be given a name, without inability to, when negated, inspire nothing that is reassuring, but instead guilt? I suppose I saw the taboo in giving what creator a name at all. This is perhaps why I see it as an it, but I assume much more than that as to its longevity, in a mind at this point way too atrophied by guilt. However, anyway, at that point I realized the equivocal nature of the words in my head, if they nothing else, for they're my God, and as for God, I have this memory to strain me, that I knew what I would eventually understand. It doesn't exist. If we are to say that to think is to be, perhaps if God thinks, it is then only a manner of a thought, a spiral. But put this in the head of a fourth grader. See what happens when elliptical thinking happens to one who does not know he is doing it. The words then simplify into a single statement. In youth, the words in our head correspond to how we feel about the world. Perhaps I knew this fierce round even then, but I'd like to think it was just me damning myself for fun, though I know it was for no sake. And God isn't. The fierce round grows tears, but no creation would ever want to be perceived as the result of some thing. Especially if our humanity denies us this in ourselves. That is, our humanity. The ability to will ourselves responsible for equally righteous rounds of thought that perhaps, though elliptical, are not damaging. What of it then? I should rather forget it all than remember what brought me to that place where it became a void, which is something different. Such would give too much value to needing a name. So yeah, let's say I come across something unnameable. At first I do not know it is unnameable. How I got to this point is beyond my reckoning. I pull the closest word I can. For example, fuck, to the word I think I understand and find it does not quite fit. At this point I am possessed far and away by an obsession to find the name for this without. Basically, I try to name it. I cannot name it. I realize I cannot name it. And when I realize this, I suddenly know also that I'd reflexively given my own name to it. I realize I've done this, and suddenly when I realize that the name is untrue, it becomes untrue. Such is the function of a given name to memory. For a while now, the man at the bar had been talking of invincibility. Well, to specify, he talked with a deep, profound intonation, intoning ever more profoundly as the empty glasses on his table grew to absurd proportions, until they looked like some defunct avant-garde project. To specify even more, the man talked of his own immortal abilities, how he had defied the laws of physiognomy by stabbing himself 50 times and never bleeding, had even hit himself with a frying pan over and over and felt no sting, had licked a wet socket, and though jolted, had not gone unconscious. Normally such a blowhard would have been kicked out of these establishments long ago, unless you happen to be funny, and the deep conviction with which the man spoke made us all laugh at him. He said he was working on how to fly. After one too many, one of the patrons asked, "How do you suppose this invincibility of yours works, you old Fauntleroy?" His answer was quick and decisive. "Well, every time I pull my deadly trick, someone else on this planet somewhere dies." After we all tried to figure this in some minutes of silence, the man pulled out a .48 caliber, and holding it limply in his hands, pointed it at the so-called invincible man, who saw his hand on the trigger and remained without expression, barely noticing. "Hey now, Johnny, put that away." "No, gentlemen," interrupted the invincible man. "Let him shoot me straight in the chest, and I will show you here how I transfer my death to someone else. Maybe even one of you here will die for me." At this point, everyone in the bar had stood up, and were looking at Johnny with fearful, drunken eyes, and silence followed, and the man with the gun stood like an inebriated Spartan, leveled his gun at the invincible man, smiling complacently and holding his chin up. And he suddenly darkened and leant his eyes straight into Johnny's and said, "Fire, you scoundrel." After which Johnny fired the gun, as though in the midst of an orgasm, and the invincible man fell over, dead, blood spraying everywhere. Johnny, the man with the gun, with beads of blood on his face, said to his terrified counterparts, I guess he died for himself that time." He had little to say to those who knew him personally, and compensated for his speechlessness by adding character to his actions. They were his stead. He was focusing his efforts now on walking with character. Strangers on the street, who did not know the man, would see his nice walk, and they would think he was someone with lots of nice things to say, lots of intelligent things to say. But it was not only with walks. The man he already had a way to grab things, his hands overtaking a helpless muffin, the dexterity of an octopus, or playing a fork into his grasp with a kind of feminine caress, and then grasp after the caress, which was not so feminine and was strong. And when he clapped his hands, his elbows to his wrists, wagged towards and away from his torso, which rotated in a saucy way and gave the man sex appeal. The movements were made to highlight the apparent loose machinery of his bones. Easy grace to spur the interest of the man's body and shroud the emptiness of his mind. Now he was working on his walks. It had become a Zen-like practice, a peaceful obsession that one may have with certain private nits in their personality or appearance. His walk at this point was thus. His feet lorded over the legs as though his feet were pulled by extra weight, and it was like his legs were lengths of gum that dripped into his steps. He walked also while turning his feet in slightly, like a gimp. This created the impression of deformity, struggling to meld with perfection, and succeeding in melding and deeper in, showing the world the sadness and bitterness that comes with knowing you are bare. Now, I find this to be somewhat of a good way to explain religion to myself, if even. I think of the man's walk, and I think of Christ's walk through Bethlehem. I think of his walk as he's carrying that damn cross. And I think of, in the beginning of what I read, that there is something that Christ didn't know. That there really was no God, but that he believed it. He believed in it, and knew that no one else would believe in it, and know that nothing came afterwards. But he saw the virtue in this. He saw the virtue, to me. But he made that void too much like himself by ascribing a gender to what should remain unnamable. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's lots of ways to perceive religion, yes. But once you add a gender to the deity, you take away an element of knowing, really. You take away an element of figuring out your own way. And that's why it's kind of a satire that this world could be something like a heaven, liminal. That maybe was why Christ, whatever, I haven't read the Bible, but that was maybe why Christ, and I did go to Sunday school, and I have read some of it, but that was maybe why Jesus needed to figure out why exactly he had to go under a tree and face his doubts. Because he was still a man, you know? And you can't give credence to something beyond yourself wholly. Holy, as in WHOLLY, without giving up a part of yourself to that it. So a part of you becomes the it. But a part of you will always resent losing that aspect of yourself that was your ego in a gender, in knowing that you are a him or her, in knowing that you are beyond what is beyond. Because what is beyond, at least to me, doesn't exist. So the only way to exist is to beyond that void. To beyond the fuck out of that void. And arrive at Earth, at planet Earth. And not figure a way to get outside of that itself by creating a walk. Because then you carry a cross heavier than God could bear. So that's basically it. I don't really know what else to say. I'm gonna go smoke and read Schopenhauer.